Wallace Chapman, 3:45. See you then. Lisa Owen, Checkpoint next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, sound the whistle. A referee for supermarket stoushes is on the way. The Consumer Affairs Minister joins us live to talk about his plan for a Grocery Commissioner. As food prices get chunkier, some school lunchboxes are looking leaner than ever. The battery's running flat on people power, with staff shortages forcing CEOs onto the shop floor and businesses to cut hours and capacity. Should schools hit with the double whammy of COVID and winter ills get extra help to achieve NCEA? Car pollution is killing thousands of New Zealanders, and the honey thief in a potentially sticky spot after ignoring the honesty box and not realising she was being filmed. Whoops.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Madie, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Police are investigating a burglary at a Tauranga mosque that's worried the Muslim community in the lead up to one of the biggest religious days of the year. Police and community leaders are meeting tonight, as Jean Edwards reports.
Traditional men's clothing and electronic equipment was stolen from the mosque on Monday, and a car was torched outside later that night. The Federation of Islamic Associations is worried the garments could be used by someone to infiltrate Eid festival events this weekend. The police, including National Security Services, are meeting community leaders tonight to discuss safety measures in the lead up to the Holy Day on Sunday. Police want to hear from anyone who saw something suspicious at the Tauranga Mosque that night.
The Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister says a new watchdog for the supermarket sector will have teeth. The government today announced it will set up a Grocery Commissioner as a referee for the supermarket industry. It's also released a draft mandatory code of conduct aimed at preventing the country's two major retailers from using their power to push cost and risk onto suppliers. Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark says the Grocery Commissioner will have the ability to fine supermarkets that breach that code, along with other powers.
So the Grocery Commissioner will have the ability to issue warnings, to put fines in place as well, and they'll be able to go to the courts as well and seek that contracts be overruled.
Legislation to establish the Grocery Commissioner is expected to be introduced later this year. Employers across almost every sector are reporting business closures and lost productivity from short staffing, and some are asking the government for more help. A lack of nurses has forced Te Maru's Strathallan Retirement Village to temporarily close, with 30 residents relocated across Canterbury and Otago. Jeremy Nicol, the chief executive of village owner Arvida Group, says it's found 5 new nurses overseas, but it could take months to secure their visas and convert their foreign qualifications. He wants easier access to more overseas staff.
The big issue there is that for a registered nurse to come in, there's a 2-year stand down on the pathway to residency. Given the lack of registered nurses across all the healthcare sectors in New Zealand, it would be great if the government could see its way to allowing them immediate pathways to residency.
The aged care sector lacks an estimated 1,000 registered nurses. The Prime Minister says higher numbers of COVID infections among older New Zealanders and an outbreak in Waitemata have driven up hospitalisation rates. Monday's Health Ministry update said there'd been a rise of cases among patients in the area, including at a community site, and evidence visitors to North Shore Hospital had been passing on the virus to patients. 522 people are now in hospital across the country, up from 493 yesterday. Speaking in Sydney today, Jacinda Ardern said the fact more vulnerable people were getting COVID and a spike in cases in Waitemata had contributed to more people being in hospital. A former ACC employee who won a compensation case for being bullied on the job is appalled the manager responsible appears to have been promoted. An organisational chart provided to RNZ shows the manager has been seconded to what looks to be an executive-level position. Yvette Phillips will receive ongoing cover for a work-related mental injury that happened while she was working for the agency. She says she's appalled and disappointed the manager has been promoted.
I'm without a job and without a career because these events that took place that I now got covered with a claim were such gross misconduct.
Asked why the manager was promoted, ACC said it can't comment on individual employee matters. To sport, and the Warriors boss, Cameron George, says a recent change in personal circumstances is behind star fullback Reece Walsh's about-face on his commitment to remain with the NRL club in Auckland next season. Walsh has been released from his contract a year early, a move that comes after the 19-year-old publicly denied rumours in April that he was seeking a release. New Zealander Chance Nicol-Klokstad will rejoin the Warriors from the Canberra Raiders in Walsh's place, and George says the timing was important.
I made it extremely clear to Reece and his agent Nash Dawson that we weren't going to entertain any form of release or consideration for a release until such time we had an option equal, if not better, to what Reece brings to our footy club.
Walsh is looking to return to his former club, the Brisbane Broncos, to stay close to family. And New Zealand tennis player Erin Routliffe and her Polish partner are in Wimbledon doubles quarterfinals action late tonight. The pair beat the fifth seeds to reach the last eight, their best effort at a Grand Slam. Despite playing on the lower-ranked courts, Routliffe says the support has been fantastic.
Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I looked up at the stands a couple times and I saw that it was like almost full completely. I love playing at Wimbledon just because they don't need big names, big singles players to watch. They just love tennis, which I absolutely appreciate.
Routliffe and Alicia Rosolska will play an unseeded American pair for a place in the semi-finals. That's the news.
A leadership crisis in the UK.
Well, he should do what he should have done some time ago and resign. And if he doesn't do that, then the party will have to force him out.
A warning of a new COVID wave.
This variant might have increased ability to infect people who have already been infected before, as well as those people who are vaccinated.
And a satellite lost in space.
The longer it goes on where there's no contact, the more serious that this will be.
Start your day on the right path. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland and Auckland, cloudy. Rain is spreading south tomorrow morning and afternoon, possibly heavy. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mostly cloudy. Patchy drizzle about Coromandel, spreading south tomorrow afternoon, then becoming rain. From Waikato to Kapiti, including the central high country, mainly fine. Frost or fog tomorrow morning. Rain is spreading south to Whanganui tomorrow afternoon and evening. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, increasing fine spells with a possible shower today, clouds returning later tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine today. Areas of cloud tomorrow, then rain tomorrow evening. Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin, fine today. Low cloud developing in the morning, then patchy drizzle from the afternoon. For Central Otago, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland. South coast showers are clearing tomorrow afternoon, otherwise fine with frost and fog patches tomorrow morning. And light showers are forecast for the Chatham Islands. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have the latest news headlines and traffic for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, the staff shortages hitting several sectors all at once. Sickness and a lack of workers have some companies moving office staff onto the shop floor or shutting up to let the storm pass. More on that shortly, but first get ready for the new Grocery Commissioner. The new referee the government's announced, designed to keep the supermarket industry in check. With powers to issue warnings and dish out fines, the government says the Grocery Commissioner will ensure customers are getting a fair deal. Rosie Gordon reports.
The weekly supermarket shops hitting Kiwis where it hurts the most, their pockets. Produce is quite expensive for what it is. We get breakfast items and dinner items, and you get like 3 nights worth of dinner for like over $100. It's ridiculous.
So dairy, fish, meat. Every time I go to the meat counter, there's always someone looking and comparing and trying to find something cheaper.
The cost of food's forcing some to cut back so they can get by.
We've stopped buying as much like fresh fruit and vegetables. It's more like tinned food now.
The government's responding with a new industry watchdog, a Grocery Commissioner. Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark says it will act as a referee for an industry where just 2 players are making $1 million a day in excess profits.
The Permanent Commissioner will be a referee for the sector, keeping the duopoly honest and proactively blowing the whistle where a problem is suspected.
The government's also released a draft code of conduct aimed at preventing the major retailers from using their power to push cost and risk onto suppliers. Mark Dykes is the director of the Cheese Wheel, a cheese delivery service that distributes products of around 40 smaller cheesemakers. He says having a transparent set of rules in place will make it easier for those suppliers to do business with the big players.
Well, I think some of them struggle to understand how to do business with the large supermarket chains being small and what all the implications are. And I think a code of conduct is just one of the things that will make that easier for them.
The country's 2 big supermarket owners are on board with the changes. Countdown says it supports the code of conduct and looks forward to making a submission in the consultation period. Foodstuffs, which owns New World, Pack and Save and Foursquare, says it too backs the code of conduct and the introduction of a watchdog. Consumer Chief Executive John Duffy thinks the measures announced today will benefit consumers eventually.
I think they will over time. So it's an important station on a longer journey to fixing what is a bit of a train wreck of a market at the moment. So actually having strong regulation in place is a huge step forward.
Shoppers we spoke to are counting on it making a difference.
I'd hope so. Definitely imagine that the government is having an intervention of that magnitude, that there's an impact on grocery prices.
I mean, you would hope so, right? But who really knows?
Legislation to establish the Grocery Commissioner is expected to be introduced later this year.
Ko taku manuhiri nai nei, ko David Clark, the Consumer Affairs Minister, joins us now. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
Specifically, what is the Grocery Commissioner going to do?
Well, their job is to oversee the sector and hold the industry to account. They'll be producing annual reviews of competition, and where they suspect that things aren't going as they should be, they'll have powers to intervene and to dish out fines if they think that's warranted, and that we're looking at what those will be. They may yet be a percentage of turnover, which certainly has kept bigger players on their toes in the UK. They'll be able to implement compulsory undertakings. They'll be able to take court action where they strike out a deal they think is unfair. There are a range of measures. They can start with warnings, right, and publish the kinds of advice they're giving to the big players. So they've got a range of tools that will be put in place through legislation that'll be introduced to Parliament later this year.
OK, so that legislation is on the way, but let's just talk about your expectations. When you say they'll be able to give fines, in essence, are you talking about spot fines? They will just issue a fine without having to go to court?
I imagine that they'll go through a range of measures, starting with warnings, simple warnings, clear warnings. Then they'll be able to get agreement from the grocery sector and to undertake to do things differently. If they don't live up to that, then ultimately, yes, they'll be able to issue fines in certain situations or go to court to get deals struck out. So
and the power to order them to do certain things, Minister?
Yes, yep.
OK. So can you give me an example? Because you've described this job as being a referee, right? Keeping the supermarket duopoly honest, blowing the whistle. At what point, give me an example, would the whistle sound? Well, $20 a kilo courgettes or what?
Obviously, this comes down to how dealings are done within the sector, where there is anti-competitive behaviour, where the suppliers are not allowed to bargain in a fair way for a fair price, or they're kept from supplying other competitors. they'll be gathering that kind of evidence if they see it happening in the market. I think the thing to say, though, is that overseas experience and the experience here with the market study underway is that when the spotlight's on the sector, they're all on their best behaviour. We've already seen a number of changes in the sector just as a result of even having the market study underway. And that's what I'd expect in the first instance, is that players in the sector would make sure that they're putting on their best show.
What advice have you had about anti-competitive behaviour?
Well, the market study itself, over 500 pages, detailed things that the Commissioner was concerned about. For example, the use of land covenants. They made 14 recommendations of things they thought could be done to improve competition in the sector through making land available through planning laws, getting rid of those restrictive covenants, which we've already done and is now law as of the end of last month.
But you've told us, Minister, that you're waiting on advice, a cost-benefit analysis of whether it's worth forcing them to sell off assets. So where are you at with that?
That particular piece of advice will come through to me later in the year. That's separate to the Commerce Commission's recommendations. They obviously did not recommend that. They didn't think they had enough time to do a thorough analysis on that particular approach, but it's one that I'm interested in finding out more about because I want to know whether it's better to break up the supermarket or just if we implement the changes that we're implementing, whether that indeed is a better way of making sure things are more competitive. Either way, we want the best deal for consumers.
Okay, so in terms of the things that you have committed to so far, once those reforms are in place, can you say that groceries will be cheaper? Because that's what people care about.
Yeah, we're already seeing behaviour that shows a change in the market.
But you yourself have said that is not structural change, Minister.
Correct.
You've said that it's just sort of spot behaviour and it's not structural change. So real, meaningful, cheaper groceries. Can you say that these reforms, as they stand, will deliver that?
Well, we'll be able to judge that based on the margins the supermarkets are making. The grocery regulator will be able to make its own assessment of competition in the market into the future. It'll be able to assess whether the supermarkets are continuing to make excess profits, whether there's any mischief in their behaviour, or whether the profits they're making are fair, and then it will be able to intervene in the market. That's the powers we're giving them.
Minister, we're almost out of time, so can I get a quick answer, please? Will you stake your job on cheaper groceries as a result of these changes?
I will stake my job on consumers getting a fairer deal at the checkout counter. That is absolutely our objective.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark. It is almost 16 minutes past 5. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Employers are putting the heat on the government to help solve a major people power problem. Worker shortages appear to be stifling almost every sector, and they're being blamed for business closures, burnout and lost productivity. Katie Todd has the story.
Step inside Sealord's wet fish factory in Nelson and you'll see empty space where there's usually a flurry of workers helping to process the season's hawkie catch. The company's chief executive, Doug Paulin, can't fill the vacancies. He's even been working in the factory himself.
Currently we're running at about 150, so we're 300 workers short. For that factory, hawkie season is the thing that makes it work. So when you don't get a hawkie season, it becomes a loss-making exercise for us. In a year where we're looking at increased costs across the business, it's just another added downside. So we'll lose about $5 million in that wet fish factory this year.
Another chief executive taking a turn on the tools is Mark Rose at Queenstown's Rees Hotel and Luxury Apartments.
You know, a typical day for me, like today, was I came to work at 6 and I washed dishes, and then I drove some guests up Coronet Peak to go skiing. I came back, washed dishes, just gone into the office to do some work. I will go into housekeeping and strip rooms for a couple of hours, and then I'll wash dishes again tonight.
That's the result of a fruitless search for chefs, kitchen hands, attendants and guest agents, with tough competition. The website Seek shows 2,591 hospitality vacancies nationwide. About 400 are in Queenstown. The problem's compounded by staff sickness and an influx of tourists. And Mr Rose is only running the hotel at 70% capacity.
The lack of staff is dreadful, but the real pressure points come on that the people who are working just get killed. And it's just not fair on them.
Health workers are also in seriously short supply. Take a look at the aged care sector, lacking an estimated 1,000 registered nurses. It's got so bad, Timaru's Strathallan Retirement Village has had to close for now. Arvida Group Chief Executive Jeremy Nichols says 30 residents are being relocated across Canterbury and Otago.
We've had members leave to go to other businesses or to the DHB, and just without the right level of registered nurse cover, you can't provide safe staffing levels for hospital level care.
Stretched vets worry the health of animals could be on the line too. Julie South from vet recruitment agency Vet Staff says the country's about 150 full-timers and 50 locum vets short.
The pressure on vets is severe. Some of them are making really tough calls. You know, they are closing their clinics for days at a time. They are trying to consolidate where they are multi-practice. One practice might have several clinics. They are closing down one practice so that they can put more staff on the other one.
With the border creaking open, Sea Lord is hopeful migrants will trickle back in, making next year a lot easier. Mark Rose says he'll just be gritting his teeth and getting on with it for the next 2 or 3 months. But long waits are infuriating the aged care sector. Jeremy Nichols found 5 nurses overseas who are keen to work in Timaru, but expects getting their visas and converting their foreign qualifications will take 3 months. And he thinks bureaucracy is blocking access to more overseas staff.
The big issue there is that for a registered nurse to come in, there's a 2-year stand down on the pathway to residency. Given the lack of registered nurses across all the healthcare sectors in New Zealand, it would be great if the government could see its way to allowing them immediate pathways to residency.
Employers who want to bring in overseas staff on work visas also need accreditation from Immigration New Zealand. Vet recruiter Julie South says that's adding compliance costs and admin at the worst possible time.
I wish we could do more, but the accredited employer status requirement is just stupid.
How much New Zealand's own brain drain of skilled workers is contributing to staff shortages isn't fully clear yet. Between January and April, Stats NZ says the country lost a net total of 8,700 people overseas. Migration data for May is due out next week.
It is 21 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what it's like at your place of work. Are you having to do double duty because of staff shortages, or close up on certain days, or work shorter hours? Would love to hear your thoughts on that. And also, the referee for the grocery sector, is that going to work? The government has announced a Grocery Commissioner today. Send us your thoughts via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email is checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko Evi anō tēnei.
Tēnā koe, Lisa. The government is to set up a Grocery Commissioner to monitor the country's 2 major supermarket chains. Commerce Minister David Clark told Checkpoint the Commissioner will be able to hold the industry to account. Employers across almost every sector are reporting business closures and lost productivity from short staffing. At Timaru's Strathallan Retirement Village, a lack of nurses has forced the facility to temporarily close, with 30 residents relocated across Canterbury and Otago. Police are investigating a burglary at a Tauranga mosque that's worried the Muslim community in the lead-up to one of the biggest religious days of the year. Police and community leaders are meeting tonight to discuss safety measures in the lead-up to the holy day on Sunday. A new study has found that car pollution is killing thousands of New Zealanders each year. Lead author of the study, Gerda Kushel, says the results were unexpected and startling. The head of the Māori Health Authority says at-home bowel screening can help save hundreds of Māori and Pasifika lives. A campaign was launched today to try and boost the number of people getting their free screening kits. And the Prime Minister says higher numbers of COVID infections among older New Zealanders and an outbreak in Waitemata have driven up hospitalisation rates. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the main centres. In Auckland on the southwestern motorway northbound, so towards Helensville, just after the Hillsborough Road off-ramp, a truck has broken down and is blocking the left lane, so some delays there. We'll keep an eye on traffic and update you with the latest headlines at about 5:40.
Kia ora rā e hoa. There's been high drama in London following the resignation of two of the British government's most senior ministers who quit within 10 minutes of each other. The PM continues to dig in. The ABC's Nick Dole reports from London.
Millions of Britons were sitting down to the 6 o'clock news when suddenly one of the country's most senior ministers pulled the pin.
In the last few minutes, news that the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has just resigned.
Moments later, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak also quit. In letters to the Prime Minister, they expressed their dismay about the standards Boris Johnson is setting. While the illegal parties at number 10 have been a major source of angst, this latest scandal is centred on the Prime Minister's response to allegations of sexual misconduct. Last week, the Tory Deputy Whip, Chris Pincher, admitted drinking too much and embarrassing himself. It's alleged he groped two men at a private club in London. It's since emerged that when Boris Johnson appointed him to the role, he knew that he'd been accused of sexual impropriety several years before as well. That's despite number 10 and several ministers denying that fact for days. Overnight, Boris Johnson issued a mea culpa.
Well, it was a long time ago and it was only raised orally with me, but that is no excuse. I mean, I should have acted on it. Yeah, I wish... what I wanted was to give Chris Pincher, if not the benefit of that, then the ability to prove that he could do better. That was the wrong decision, and I bitterly regret it.
The Prime Minister also didn't deny he'd used the phrase pincher by name, pincher by nature. This latest scandal is only adding to concerns among Tory members and some former party heavyweights that this Prime Minister is loose with the truth. Michael Heseltine was a senior member of Margaret Thatcher's government.
I know Boris well. He took over my constituency. I like him. I get on well with him on a personal level. But that is often the case with real rogues. They can be entertaining and good company, providing you can live with the lack of integrity.
Boris Johnson's election win in 2019 destroyed Labour's hold over some of its most traditional territory. The MPs who were swept to power believe Mr Johnson has a certain X factor with voters who support his approach to Brexit. Under party rules, the Prime Minister will be spared from another confidence vote after surviving the last one, but there's a real threat those rules could be changed.
Back home, students and teachers hit with the double whammy of winter ills and COVID are anxious to know if they'll get any extra help to achieve NCEA this time round. Attendance at some schools has been around 70%, with students away with COVID or flu or forced to isolate with whānau. And sick teachers has meant in some cases a total return to online learning or rostered days on campus to cover staff shortages. As a result of lockdowns over the last 2 years, NCEA grade thresholds were lowered and students could earn bonus credits, or unexpected event grades, and exams were delayed. Canterbury West Coast Secondary Principals Association President and Burnside High School Principal Phil Holstein joins me now. Kia ora, Phil. I hear you're a bit under the weather. Kei te pihea koe. How are you doing?
Kia ora, Lisa. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I've been very much a home-based principal for this week, testing positive last Friday. And I've seen over the last week, if you're so, during this time, my senior leadership team has been decimated, and currently we have 1 of 7 remaining on site to run the whole school, with me in the background from home.
You with COVID and 1 person still standing?
1 member of our senior leadership team, yes.
Okay. So how would you sum up the situation at both your school and other schools? How bad is it?
I first talk about us. Is the fact that on Monday, very clearly, we'll be monitoring things, particularly around staff absences. That's the key before we can work on anything else. It was growing numbers, up to around 40 staff members. And then around that, of course, was me, and then a few of the other senior leadership team. But then it's our pastoral team on top of that. We're also struck with at home either sick or home isolating or with flu. So that whole package, like a perfect storm, we said, I don't think we can sustain classroom teaching face-to-face. We just couldn't cover all of that and be a safe school. So we made the decision at that stage just for 2 days to go to full home learning for all students for just for 2 days and review it. But the situation sadly got no better. So we continued that through to the end of the week. A tough call, but the only call that we can make considering the circumstances.
And as far as you know, Phil, in terms of your association, are most of the schools juggling similar circumstances?
I wouldn't say to the extent that we are, but every school we've talked to are doing some sort of hybrid learning situation, be it rostering year levels home at a time, just to balancing carefully their relief cover, with able to provide that face-to-face teaching. So we're all going through it at various levels and various stages.
Obviously that puts pressure on your staff, but the students as well. So senior students who are looking at NCEA, what kind of pressure is it putting on them? What are they saying?
Very much so. This, at the end of the term, is always much assessment heavy. And so you can imagine the times that this is when we really needed to be on site, particularly with assessment issues. Fortunately, we have been able to still continue those assessments, so students come in with staff to complete them, but that's not the ideal situation. We recognise for our Year 13s, though, this is the third year in a row. These students have experienced COVID all through their years of qualifications, and for Year 12s, it's the second year. So you can imagine, one, that they're used to it, but sadly, it is having an impact. It has to, not only on their qualifications and results for that, but just their general well-being.
Yeah, and some teachers are saying that they're expecting the third term to be worse. So would you like to hear if there is going to be any relief extended around NCEA, around deadlines, extra credits, this kind of thing?
I think it's timely that we hear something from NZQA. At the end of term one, we got a very clear message, and it was, at least we know that they were monitoring the situation, but they weren't prepared to make any adjustments yet. And we all understood that, and I think that was accepted. We all hope for a better term two than what we've got, but after the experience of what we're going through in term two now, I think a call needs to be made sooner rather than later about whether or not they are considering making any adjustments like they've done in the previous 2 years. I know that NZQA have provided to schools an NCEA disruption surveys to test how things are around schools. I know that they've got a good response from schools. I know they're analysing that data. So I expect that before the end of the term there will be something similar to term one that we receive, to saying where they're at and what they're intending to do.
Thanks for your time, Phil. Hopefully you're feeling better soon. That is Burnside High School Principal Phil Holstein there. It is 29 minutes to 6. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And right now it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e Nainei, called Giles Beckford, who joins us live from Wellington. OK, it's all about the supermarkets, Giles. So what are they saying about this announcement about the new referee, the Grocery Commissioner, and also the mandatory code of conduct?
Well, they're positive, and they couldn't be anything but, could they? Because they had accepted it as in principle right at the beginning of the Commerce Commission hearings. So the one big chain that we managed to be in contact with this afternoon, Foodstuffs, that's Pack and Save, New World and Foursquare. They say, well, it's good. It means that there will be some clarity, there'll be some confidence in the sector, somebody independent to bring research-based, and they emphasise that, research-based decisions to bear on the sector. So they like it. Of course, devil in the detail for them will be the wording of the mandatory code and really just what muscle the grocery person in charge will have. But we'll wait and see on that one. The smaller operators we've spoken to, Matthew Lane from Night and Day. Now, they've got 50-odd stores around the country. They've been very critical of the way they've been treated by some of the big suppliers, not being able to get the right amount of goods, the right sort of goods at the right price. He's confident that the government's making progress on bringing reform to the sector. He says that should in particular give confidence and some heart to suppliers in particular. From the retailer's point of view, we'll wait and see, he says, but they are making progress. He says the government shouldn't be shying away from the prospect of breaking up the two big chains if that's what's needed. And he says that doesn't necessarily mean forcing them to sell stores, but for instance, you could separate the brands Foursquare, Pack and Save and world, just to take foodstuffs as an example. And if you operationally separated them so that they couldn't collude in using their buying power, then that would bring some degree of competition and would open up things. Soupy, whom we've heard quite a bit about, they're of course a food supplier. Sarah Ball is not that impressed. Yes, it's good for suppliers, she says, and they've needed a fair deal for quite some time. But she says for consumers, this isn't going to do much. It's actually not going to lower prices anytime soon for people at the checkout. And she says really what's needed throughout the sector is in fact new thinking about the way we supply groceries and food in general. And of course, they have their own model on that one, and they're currently raising millions of dollars to try and expand. So generally a positive reaction to the government moves. More is needed. People want to see the colour of the wording of the Code of Conduct and the powers that the Commissioner will have. We're making progress. Obviously, for the smaller operators, they're hoping that they make it a bit quicker.
Get your joggers on, Giles. Let's take a sprint around the market.
Well, I bring you glad tidings. The first half of the year was awful. The second half of the year for the share market's turning out to be quite positive. 1.6% gain for the market today. Its highest in 3 weeks, so that's a 176-point gain for the top 50. New Zealand dollar, 61.6 US cents. That's on the back foot, near a 2-year low. 90.7 Australian, and the pound sterling, we should note, has been under a bit of pressure from all those political shenanigans in Whitehall, resignation of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So sterling, Kiwis buying currently about 51.3 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. Ka kite. Giles Beckford there, live from Wellington. An Auckland school says 80% of its students are now asking for school-funded lunch as parents struggle with the cost of feeding the family. People in Mangere today told Checkpoint they're relying on extended family to get by. Others say their weekly bills have doubled. Meanwhile, an agency helping people in hardship says it's seeing demand for its services that would have been unfathomable 10 years ago. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe.
The midweek shop in Mangere, but you can forget feeding the family for 50, 100, 150. Today, it'll cost you a small fortune. Less bang for your buck, lunchboxes, a little bit more beer. Families stretched as prices climb month on month.
Before 150 can feed, I have 3 kids, and now it's like almost 300 to be honest.
I used to buy the cucumber for $1.50. And then $3 for 2 and $5 for 3 or 4. But nowadays, just only $3.50 for just only 10 centimeter cucumber.
My mum, she's the one that keeps all the kids fed, and she has savings and that.
So I've come to Countdown to do a bit of a food shop of my own. I've got my trusty wee lunchbox with me, and we're going to get a few items. We're going to get some healthy items and also some not so healthy items, and then we're going to compare cost. Let's go and have a look. We're looking for a few things to fill a school lunchbox. Nothing fancy, bread for a few sarnies and a snack to get us through the day. We're running a bit of a comparison. White versus whole grain, bag of chips or crispy apple. Healthier is better, we know that. But what about budget? The first item on there is this bag of chips. Remember these big multi-packs. You get 18 bags, little bags of chips in these, and that only sets you back, well, what have we got here? $5.50. Now compare that to a bag of apples. There are 1.5 kilos worth of apples in here. It looks like about maybe between 10 and 12 apples. Well, surprise, surprise, that is more expensive, in fact, than a bag of 18 chips. $6 for this bag of apples. Another comparison, the old loaf of white bread. Delicious, good for a sarnie, good for a jam sammy. It's cheap though, $1.20 for a whole loaf. Compare that to your healthier option, the whole grain bread here, or multi-grain toast as we've got. Now that will cost you, well, nearly $2 more, $3 for a loaf of that. So how are families getting by? Those who don't have a lot but need to feed themselves, their kids, fill the car, pay the rent, pay power. We've come to Jean Batten Primary School, where Assistant Principal Siolo John tells me, frankly, some kids wouldn't eat at all if not for school intervention.
Some of them have lots of food. They come to school with full lunch boxes, but then on the other side of the scale we have children who come because they know that they're going to have a feed at school, and that's cool.
Siolo says those breakfast clubs, lunches and schools have seen massive uptake in the last 2 years. Before it was go if you want. Now it's parents calling ahead to make sure breakfast club is on. Every child here can access a meal and the vast majority now take it up. Some asking to take leftovers home.
I think probably 80% of the children would access all of that.
80% of kids?
80% of children would access breakfast and school lunches.
It is, by Siolo's own admission, a big number and one that's grown.
That does kind of indicate to us that there are pressures on whānau to have food on their table.
LifeWise Chief Executive Haihaitu Barrett says demand for the social development organisation services has reached levels that would have been unfathomable a decade earlier.
It's around survival in today's times. It's around making good decisions on whether to pay the power bill to keep whānau warm, or to go to the supermarkets in those increased prices and get some kai. And sometimes even our food choices are difficult. It's around, are we feeding our babies or are we keeping them warm?
Back in Mangere, those financial decisions are being made in the Countdown car park. What to buy, what to leave, how to feed.
Sad, like having to see kids like that even on school trips, kids having no lunches.
I've actually got a list at home that I keep, and it's like, right, pork's cheaper at this supermarket because it's just got to the point where petrol, it's just ridiculous. So yeah, and we've got kids that need lunchboxes, food and stuff too. It's just it's quite hard.
These people out there, more people out there on the street, begging for money, and it's really hard. Even sometimes I can't even afford to, to buy what my kids eat a week.
Parents struggling as the cost of feeding the family surges.
And if you're listening on radio to that story from the Nix, we'll put up the video version on our webpage. It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And we would love your feedback, homai o whakaaro, on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you're filling the lunchbox with at the moment. If you've got any cheats or good ideas to do it in a healthy and cheap way, we'd love to hear from you. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now. Anaya Iwi, mina pitipiti kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. Rival grocery retailers are backing the government's latest moves to bring more competition to the supermarket sector. Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark has announced an industry watchdog and mandatory code of conduct to bring greater scrutiny to the sector and promote fair trading between the supermarket chains and suppliers. Students and teachers hit with the double whammy of winter ills and COVID are anxious to know if they'll get any extra help to achieve NCEA this year. Burnside High School Principal Phil Holstein told Checkpoint he thinks NZQA needs to make a call sooner rather than later. An Auckland school says 80% of its students are now asking for school-funded lunch as parents struggle with the cost of feeding the family. Assistant Principal of Jean Batten Primary School, Siolo John, says some kids wouldn't eat at all if not for school intervention. The British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been forced to carry out a reshuffle after two of his most senior ministers resigned over his leadership. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, both said they could no longer support Mr Johnson. And one person has been identified by police after a threat to the Sacred Heart College in Auckland this morning. The school had to close for the day following an anonymous threat via social media. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Auckland, that lane seems to still be blocked on the Southwestern Motorway northbound just after the Hillsborough Road off-ramp. Expect delays. A truck has broken down and is blocking the left lane. And in the South Island, in Southland, State Highway 1 at Bluff, the intersections between Liffey Street and Slaney Street. It's closed that road because a collapsed building and downed power lines has made it unsafe. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Evie. The Prime Minister's touched down in Sydney on the next leg of her Australian trip. Australia's Prime Minister has announced New Zealanders in New South Wales will be eligible for flood relief payments, which will roll out from tomorrow. Jacinda Ardern was quick to compare the approach being taken by Albanese to that under the former Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.
Knowing that whomever is affected, you're seeing equitable treatment, means that New Zealanders can see that they are increasingly recognised and valued.
We probably wouldn't have seen this under a Morrison government.
No, in fact, we did explicitly see the opposite.
Our political reporter Annika Smith is travelling with the Prime Minister in Sydney and joins us now. So, Annika, more support for Kiwis?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, the Prime Minister landed in Sydney this morning to promote tourism through New Zealand and has pivoted to the flooding here in New South Wales, with Prime Minister Albanese announcing financial support for Australians. Now, New Zealanders have accessed this financial scheme in the past, but the difference today is that they've been mentioned in the main statement of the Australian government, and this really speaks to Jacinda Ardern being in the country here in Sydney, speaking to that warm and cordial relationship. And obviously, as well, the level playing field. She's lobbied not just on this trip and not just at the bilateral last month, but for this level playing field for more rights for Kiwis living here who work here and pay taxes.
And to Piramia Jacinda Ardern, well, it's supposed to be a trade mission in Australia, so what does that mean for Trans-Tasman relations?
That's right. It's the tail end of her trade mission through Europe and then to Australia. There's been a lot of talk, though, throughout the trip of the warmth of Trans-Tasman relationships, Australia being New Zealand's only official ally, and there is a real buzz in the business delegation here. I think there's a lot of excitement given the new government here, the scope for climate-friendly, green, sustainable businesses and what that could mean for business and trade between the two countries. But of course, actions speak louder than words when it comes to the Trans-Tasman relations. Jacinda Ardern has her annual bilateral meeting with Anthony Albanese on Friday morning, and it's there that we'll learn of any changes, if any, to the 501 deportee policy. Now, Jacinda Ardern at the very start of the trip sort of tempered expectations, saying that refocusing the issue from terms like 501 deportees and Scott Morrison's infamous comments about taking the trash out to this issue all boiling down to citizenship. She was refocusing that issue, and what comes out of that meeting in terms of material changes to the 501 policy remains to be seen. We'll see come Friday.
Thanks, Annika. That's our political reporter, Annika Smith, there live from Sydney, where it is still chucking it down, raining in buckets, if you were listening on radio. Car pollution is killing thousands of New Zealanders each year, according to new research, and it's costing the country billions of dollars. The study is the first of its kind and measured the health impacts of nitrogen dioxide, a toxic gas that's emitted when petrol and diesel are burned. Our reporter, Kirsty Frame, has more.
Polluted air is a major factor in stroke, heart disease, lung cancer and chronic respiratory diseases. The research says more than 3,000 New Zealanders are dying every year from air pollution, and it's mostly from cars. That's roughly 10 times the number of people who die on our roads annually. Project lead Dr. Gerda Kushel says the results were startling.
When we finally got all the modelling results together and it came out with the NO2 numbers being so high, we were quite shocked. And of course, your first response is, well, have we done something wrong? So we went through a very rigorous internal review of the results and all the calculations, because it was so much more than we expected.
The study was carried out by New Zealand experts in air quality, health and economics. It's the third instalment since 2012, but for the first time the research measures pollution data from vehicles. We now know that pollution is sending more than 13,000 people to hospital and causing asthma in about the same number of children. It's also costing the country $15.6 billion every year. The study has calculated the loss to society when people are sick or die from air pollution. For example, a person who prematurely dies from exposure has a $4.5 million price tag. Dr. Cushel says it's one way of measuring the burden of air pollution.
There is a loss of productivity to the economy. That person can't work. Family members have probably had to be helping, looking after somebody. If somebody has been suffering from respiratory problems as a result of air pollution making it worse, then they've been experiencing some suffering in terms of a loss of life quality.
Drew Bingham from the Ministry for the Environment says there aren't any safe levels of exposure to air pollution.
Even though New Zealand does have lower levels generally than many other areas, we still find important health impacts. And that's not to say that New Zealand has great air pollution all the time everywhere. We do know that there are places where air pollution can be at quite high levels.
Polluted air does the most harm to people most vulnerable in society: tamariki, elderly, pregnant people and those with heart or lung conditions. People who live or work around traffic will also be at risk. NIWA air quality scientist Dr. Ian Longley explains.
So if we live in a quiet residential street, there is some traffic pollution around, there is some NO2 around, but if you live next to a major road, the level will be double, particularly if you live near roads which have a lot of congested traffic or those where there are a lot of clusters of tall buildings.
Dr. Ian Longley has been studying car pollution for 2 decades and says the results are not surprising, but are hopefully a wake-up call. He says we're already starting to see improvements in clean transport, and if behaviours change, our emissions will reduce.
It is 11 minutes to 6. Now, it's not quite Winnie the Pooh, but it definitely stinks. A brazen heist by a sticky-fingered thief who made off with pots and pots of clover honey from an Honesty Box stall at Ettrick near Roxburgh without paying a single cent. But here's the rub. She was caught on security camera. Now the owners are hoping someone will identify her. Well, joining us now is Honey by Wright's co-owner, Michael Wright. Kia ora, Michael. What's happened to good old-fashioned honesty?
Yeah, it slipped a bit this time, hasn't it?
Definitely. Can you describe what happens in the security footage, please?
So on Sunday night, about 6 o'clock, a lady just comes in and just loads her car up and takes off with about $230 worth of honey.
Could there be any way she didn't realise she was supposed to pay?
No, definitely not. No, not a hope.
What is the setup, Michael, with the Honesty Box there and sort of signage?
It's very small. It's only about the size of a bus shelter. And we have quite a lot of product in there, but we have video cameras and they're very well labelled. And you even see a TV screen with yourself on it. So people should realise it's real because we don't actually want to have to go to the trouble of chasing people up either. So I'm not really sure what she was thinking, but yeah.
So there is a place for them to put cash, but I also see in the security footage there's even an EFTPOS machine there, so could they pay by card too?
Yeah, so you can pay by EFTPOS. We ran an extension cord about 60 metres to a friend's house. And you can pay by EFTPOS or on the Honesty Box, but it's pretty obvious from the footage she was not making any attempt at all to pay.
No, she's loading up her arms, with several jars and coming back for a second go, it looks like.
Yeah,
so,
2 trips.
What happens now? You're appealing to amateur detectives, are you? What have you done with the video?
Well, we put it up on Facebook and it's had over 70,000 views. I'm guessing that's what you call going viral. And we have been given a few names. Normally, we have in the past gone to the police, but we don't really like to pester them with, a few jars of honey. So we find Facebook actually works better with a bit of naming and shaming, and really we don't lose much honey. People usually ring up and want to pay very quickly rather than being spread all around the internet.
So bottom line, Michael, you hope she sees herself, comes to her senses, and just, pays her tab.
Yeah, just do the right thing. I mean, we work really hard as a small business, like lots of small businesses in New Zealand, and it's a bit gutting when someone does that. And we, some people say you shouldn't have an honesty stall these days. It's, people are just going to steal stuff. But I still think there's still so many honesty stalls around, and they do really work. And we don't actually spend any money on marketing. We just let our honey sell itself, and we find we get people ring up from Auckland all the time and stuff saying, oh, we're going through Ettrick and Central Otago and brought a jar of your honey, and now they're like a lifetime customer. So that is sort of their marketing tool, is their honesty store.
I hope you succeed in getting your money back, Michael. That's Michael Wright from Honey by Rights. A former ACC employee who won a compensation case for being bullied on the job is appalled the manager responsible appears to have been promoted. In a first, ACC must compensate a former worker for the depression and anxiety she suffered there. But an organisational chart provided to RNZ shows the manager has been seconded to what looks to be an executive level position. Amy Williams reports.
When Yvette Phillips lost her job amidst a restructure at ACC and missed out on another role at her level, she took up a position 2 pay bands lower. It was $20,000 less, but she says there were no other options at the time. But the manager, whose actions contributed to Ms Phillips going on stress leave with depression and anxiety, appears to have been promoted.
It's absolutely appalling, to come out and say that ACC have got policies on what to do about bullying and harassment and still have this person promoted, it's...
Ms Phillips was a senior staff member at ACC who took her case to court and won, and now the agency must provide ongoing cover for a mental injury that happened under its watch. She says her requests for ACC to investigate the then alleged bullying internally were recorded by 2 different managers, but as far as she's aware, there was no investigation.
I feel like shouting, what did I have to do at the time to get this looked at properly?
ACC would only provide a statement outlining its process for dealing with allegations of workplace bullying and declined to be interviewed. A spokesperson says it started consulting on its new executive structure in February, and this took effect this week. Asked why the manager was promoted, the spokesperson said they cannot comment on individual employee matters. John Eatwell chairs the Institute of Organisational Psychology and advises on best practice in HR.
WorkSafe's definition provides an environment where people can flourish mental health wise rather than be damaged. Yeah, so certainly the obligation on them would be to do some sort of investigation based on this judgment, if not before.
He says employers are required to investigate claims of bullying in the workplace, whether complaints are made verbally or in writing.
Best practice would be there's a terms of reference agreed with the complainant around what was going to be the nature of the investigation, who the interviewees would be, and what the process would be, and they would get a chance to view the conclusions of that investigation.
Ms Phillips says she's disappointed and frustrated that ACC did not respond to her request for an internal investigation.
I'm without a job and without a career because these events that took place that I now got covered with a claim were such gross misconduct.
Yvette Phillips had moved her family to Christchurch to take up what she thought was her dream job with ACC. She says she still can't visit the city centre without experiencing a panic attack.
A lot of the aspects of enjoying Christchurch that we came down here for, I don't really access anymore. But I'm living the best I can and moving on in the best circumstances that I can now.
She says the ongoing weekly cover for the work-related mental injury will help her move on with her life.
Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu is jetting towards a zero-carbon future, unveiling the world's first electric tourism jet boat in Queenstown this morning. Tess Brunton went to have a look.
In Queenstown, the familiar roar of V8 engines on the Shotover River is set to become a distant memory. This is the sound of a future not too far away. Ngāi Tahu Tourism is planning to have at least half of its jet boat operations, about 12 to 15 boats, converted to electric by 2030. Its general manager, Jacinda, thinks it will be an even better experience.
You still have the sound of the jet units, but then things like coming into the canyons with the jet units and coming as close as we do at Shotover, it actually adds to the exhilaration.
It takes about an hour to charge the prototype, but that's expected to be a lot quicker with faster chargers in place.
So in Shotover, finding batteries that can charge within 25 minutes, that can run on the water for an hour, 2 trips, which is the exact same as what our fuel requirements are at the moment.
Before COVID, more than half of Ngāi Tahu Tourism's carbon footprint was from jet boats. Jacinda Cave says they want to make all their operations carbon neutral by 2050.
I think it's also saying a strong message to the tourism industry that if we can pivot and change as much as we have, so can you, and really challenging them to have a look at their operations on how they can do it as well in a unique and authentic way.
Back in 2018, Ngāi Tahu released a climate change strategy. Kai Whakahaere Lisa Tumahai says today's action plan will see that vision come to fruition. She says the iwi will take major steps to cut its greenhouse gas emissions, embrace renewable energy and reduce its overall impact over the next 9 years.
Tourism is an important commercial activity of the tribe. It's a way of us telling our story, putting our footprint on the landscape, and we'll always be present in the tourism industry. So rather than take the jet boats off the river, we're going to innovate, and we'll phase out over time.
She says there are obvious reasons to take action.
16 of our 18 marae are coastal, so there are a number of challenges there with the sea level rise. So what action are we taking to protect and preserve those things into the future? So you'll start seeing a lot of activities take place across the Ngāi Tahu Takiwā in the next 3 years.
Shotover Jet senior driver Nick Simpson tested out the new electric prototype and says it performs really well.
Yeah, looking at the boat, we've used one of our older hulls, so to look at it you wouldn't know any different from one of our current boats. It's really when you get on board and you have a look down the back where the passenger pod used to be, you'll see the 3 big battery boxes. Then if you lift the engine hatch up, you've got the 2 electric motors in there, which are so small compared to an internal combustion engine. However, around the back of the boat you've got the same 2 jet units, so from afar you really can't tell much difference at all.
While electric boats won't be ready for commercial guests for several years, Ngāi Tahu says they're putting in the mahi to tackling the effects of climate change.
Getting a bit of feedback on the cost of groceries and filling lunchboxes. This listener says, please eat kai in season. Carrots, turnips, Swedes. Grow your greens. Honestly doesn't take much. Tautoko, they say. Someone else says the Grocery Commissioner must be able to deliver some pretty hefty fines. Otherwise it won't be taken too seriously by those making $1 million in excess profits a day.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Consumer Affairs Minister says the new Grocery Commissioner will be able to fine supermarkets for anti-competitive behaviour. David Clark has told Checkpoint the Commissioner's job announced today is to oversee the industry and hold it to account. That could include making public the advice they're giving supermarket companies.
They'll be producing annual reviews of competition, and where they suspect that things aren't going as they should be, they'll have powers to intervene and to dish out fines if they think that's warranted, and that we're looking at what those will be. They may yet be a percentage of turnover, which certainly has kept bigger players on their toes in the UK.
David Clark says legislation to cover the Commissioner's powers will go before Parliament later this year. The Minister has staked his job on shoppers getting a fairer deal. The Prime Minister says higher numbers of COVID infections among older New Zealanders and an outbreak at North Shore Hospital have driven up hospitalisation rates. Monday's Health Ministry update said there'd been a rise of cases among inpatients, including at a community site, and evidence visitors had been passing on the virus. But Waitemata DHB has since refused to give any more details. Jacinda Ardern was asked about the jump in cases and hospitalisations while speaking to reporters in Sydney.
Waitemata was responsible for a reasonable part of that lift. That's because of a particular issue that we have there with COVID infection and transmission, but that's one of the contributing factors.
More than 10,200 new cases were reported today, taking the 7-day rolling average to just under 8,000, up 661 on yesterday. The police and national security services are meeting Muslim community leaders tonight to discuss safety measures in the lead up to one of the biggest religious days of the year. Police are investigating a burglary at a Tauranga mosque that's worried the Muslim community in the lead up to this weekend's Eid festival. Traditional men's clothing and electronic equipment was stolen on Monday and a car was torched outside later that night. The Federation of Islamic Associations is worried the garments could be used by someone to infiltrate festival events marking the holy day on Sunday. A former ACC employee who won a compensation case for being bullied on the job is appalled the manager responsible appears to have been promoted. In a first, the Accident Compensation Corporation must compensate a former worker for the depression and anxiety she suffered there. Amy Williams reports.
An organisational chart provided to RNZ shows the manager has been seconded to what looks to be an executive-level position. Yvette Phillips was a senior staff member at ACC for whom the agency must provide ongoing cover for a mental injury that happened under its watch. She says she's appalled the manager has since been promoted. Asked why the manager was promoted, ACC said it cannot comment on individual employee matters.
A new study shows car pollution is killing thousands of New Zealanders each year. The first of its kind study, compiled by a coalition of scientists, has measured the health impacts of nitrogen dioxide, which is emitted by petrol and diesel cars. It found air pollution is responsible for 10% of the country's deaths each year. Air pollution is now sending more than 13,000 people to hospital for respiratory and cardiac illnesses and giving the same number of children asthma. The study has also calculated the social cost of all these health impacts as $15.6 billion a year. The British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been forced to carry out a reshuffle after two of his most senior ministers resigned over his leadership. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, both said they could no longer support Mr Johnson. He's been accused of making several misleading statements. Former Cabinet Minister and Johnson critic Andrew Mitchell says removing him from office will be difficult.
It's a bit like the death of Rasputin. He's been poisoned, stabbed, he's been shot, his body's been dumped in the freezing river and still he lives. This is an abnormal Prime Minister, a brilliantly charismatic, very funny, very amusing, big character, but I'm afraid he has neither the character nor the temperament to be our Prime Minister.
One person has been identified by police after a threat was made against an Auckland school this morning. Sacred Heart College sent students home following the anonymous threat on social media. Inspector Jim Wilson says officers have found the person involved, who is extremely remorseful at what happened. A police investigation is continuing. Secondary Principals Association President Vaughan Kuyo says it's important to educate young adults on being social online. He says parents should keep an eye on children's web presence. A research partnership has been announced to rid Rakiura, Stewart Island, of major predators. Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research and Predator Free Rakiura have joined forces to eliminate possums, rats, feral cats and hedgehogs from the 180,000 hectare island. It's the biggest island predator eradication ever attempted. Forest and Bird spokesperson Dean Bagent-Mercer says the significance of the ambitious $2.8 million four-year project cannot be understated.
We're really aiming high here, and already Predator Free has talked about getting rid of rats and possums, which is extremely difficult, but added to that for Rakiura is also hedgehogs and feral cats. So the big four predators that have been introduced onto Rakiura are in the crosshairs of this project.
Dean Bagent-Mercer says it will pave the way for environmental protection in the rest of New Zealand and the world. Looking at sport, the Warriors have limited star fullback Reece Walsh's options for next season. Walsh has been released from the club for personal reasons, with a year left to run on his contract, on the condition that the 19-year-old returns to his former NRL club, the Brisbane Broncos. A deal for Walsh with the Broncos is yet to be announced, but Warriors CEO Cameron George says that was the only way they'd let Walsh go.
We want to keep control of the discussions and not turn it into a bidding war across a number of clubs. And they identified that club for us, and that's the condition we gave them the permission to go and talk to.
The Warriors have signed New Zealander Chance Nickel-Klokstad in Walsh's place. Rafael Nadal continues his quest for a record-extending 23rd Grand Slam tennis crown early tomorrow morning when he takes on American Taylor Fritz in the Wimbledon quarterfinals. World number 4, Nadal will be hoping to get revenge after the Spaniard was upset by the 24-year-old earlier this year and was then forced out of competition for 6 weeks after their match with a rib injury.
The week before Wimbledon, he won the tournament, now quarterfinals, winning already in the Master 1000. He's in a privileged position and going to be a tough quarterfinals against a great player.
And Australian Nick Kyrgios, who is facing an assault charge in Canberra following an incident involving his former girlfriend last year, is also in quarterfinal action early tomorrow morning. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, bringing power to the people. We mark an exhibition at Hutt City's Douse Gallery celebrating the role the shellfish has played in the culture of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Simon Morris is back at the movies. I wonder if he's checked out Baz Luhrmann's Elvis biopic. And capturing ink on skin with photographer Helen Mitchell and her collection of snaps taken at the Wellington Tattoo Convention. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen shortly. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland and Auckland, cloudy. Rain is spreading south tomorrow morning and afternoon, possibly heavy. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mostly cloudy. Patchy drizzle about Coromandel is spreading south tomorrow afternoon, turning to rain. From Waikato to Kapiti, including the central high country, mainly fine. Frost or fog tomorrow morning. Rain is spreading south to Whanganui tomorrow afternoon and evening. From Gisborne to Wade Upper, also Wellington. Fine spells with a possible shower today. Clouds increasing later tomorrow. Fine today for Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland. Areas of cloud tomorrow. Rain is developing tomorrow evening. Fine today as well for Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin. Low clouds developing in the morning and then you have patchy drizzle from the afternoon. For Central Otago, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland. The south coast showers are clearing tomorrow afternoon, otherwise fine, with frost and fog patches tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, light showers. The time is 9 minutes past 6. I will have the latest news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's political career is again in peril after narrowly surviving a confidence vote last month. Senior cabinet ministers have now quit over handling of sexual misconduct allegations. A growing number of his colleagues are now publicly questioning Boris Johnson's honesty, but the Prime Minister is hanging on. Here's the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason.
Are we good? Yeah.
Not according to the man sitting next to the Prime Minister this morning, the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak. A penny for his thoughts. We didn't need to wait long. In a letter to Boris Johnson this evening, Mr Sunak said the public rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. I believe these standards are worth fighting for, and that is why I'm resigning. You heard that right. The man who was Chancellor until tea time saying the government is none of these things. And he went further. Policy too. It's become clear to me that our approaches are fundamentally too different. We cannot continue like this. Moments earlier, the Health Secretary Sajid Javid had also walked.
Good evening. I'm just going to go spend some time with my family. Thank you for coming.
He left his resignation letter to do the talking, writing, "The British people rightly expect integrity from their government. We may not always have been popular, but we have been competent. Sadly, the public are concluding we are now neither. It is clear to me that this situation will not change under your leadership."
Let me ask you.
No word from the Prime Minister tonight, but there is still fulsome praise to be found from some.
I
I'm fully supportive of the Prime Minister.
So how did we get here? Let's rewind to this morning and that cabinet meeting. They've just heard what you're about to hear. The former top civil servant at the Foreign Office saying Downing Street hadn't been telling the truth.
They need to come clean. I think that the language is ambiguous. The sort of telling the truth and crossing your fingers at the same time and hoping that people are not too forensic in their subsequent questioning. And I think that is not working.
Here's why he was so angry: the handling of the appointment and resignation of this man, Chris Pincher, who until last week was Deputy Chief Whip, until he stood down after allegations he denies that he groped two men. Since then, there's been a constantly changing story about what the Prime Minister knew and when. On Friday, Boris Johnson's official spokesman told us the Prime Minister was not aware of specific allegations about Mr Pincher before his appointment as Deputy Chief Whip in February. The spokesman added, in the absence of any formal complaint, it was not appropriate to stop an appointment on the basis of unsubstantiated allegations. By yesterday, Downing Street had changed their tune, saying the Prime Minister was aware of media reports and some allegations that were either resolved or did not progress to a formal complaint. By this morning, Lord MacDonald was categoric. Mr Johnson was briefed in person. There was a formal complaint. Truth, integrity, and this man's future as our Prime Minister. A very uncertain future.
A man has been charged with multiple murders in connection with the July the 4th mass shooting in Chicago. He faces 7 charges of first-degree murder. Prosecutors say that's just the start.
We anticipate dozens of more charges centering around each of the victims. Psychological victims, physical victims, attempt murder charges, aggravated discharge.
Police say a single gunman with an AR-15 type weapon fired upwards of 70 rounds from a rooftop into the crowd. CNN's Miguel Marquez with how it all unfolded.
10 a.m. Highland Park's 4th of July parade kicks off. The streets filled, hundreds celebrating. Then 10:14 a.m. Gunshots, dozens of them rapidly being fired into the crowd.
Had to have been 20 to 30 at least that I heard. And then
shots.
20 to 30 pops, right, which were shots.
One after the other.
Which pop, 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 pop. Had no clue that it was a gun. As soon as I recognized everyone running, I knew it had to have been a shooter.
A 21-year-old suspected gunman disguises himself as a woman and fires off more than 70 rounds with a high-powered rifle. He had climbed to a fire escape to shoot from the rooftop of a business.
And the injuries that I saw, those are wartime injuries. Those are what are seen in victims of war, not victims at a parade.
Everybody started running, and it was panic, total pandemonium.
Police say the gunman then dropped the rifle and escaped the scene.
He walked to his mother's home, who lived in the area, and he blended right in with everybody else as they were running around, almost as he was an innocent spectator as well.
From there, the suspected gunman took his mother's vehicle.
We are aggressively looking for the individual who's responsible for the shooting.
Hours into the manhunt, a break. An alert citizen calls 911 after seeing the car, which leads to a brief police chase, and the shooter is arrested. Of the 7 people killed, the Lake County coroner says 5 adults died at the scene and 2 at the hospital. A hospital official says a total of 39 patients were taken to 4 area hospitals, ranging in age from 8 to 85. Tonight, 9 patients remain hospitalized.
The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is visiting affected flood zones of New South Wales, where residents are inundated after days of record rainfall. And the deluge is far from over, with more than 80,000 people receiving evacuation orders and the federal government calling in the Defence Force to help out. The flood disaster has extended well beyond Sydney, with the Hunter Valley now among the hardest hit areas. The ABC's Matt Bamford reports.
A rescue helicopter hovers above rushing floodwaters. Below, a stranded local clings to her fence.
Anybody, even if you've got a sore back, please come and tie sandbags. These guys need help.
Across the Central Coast and Hunter Valley, people are scrambling as water levels rise.
All your locals need help, so if you're on high ground already, please come down and help out your local SES.
85,000 residents are affected by evacuation orders. Rivers are peaking at their highest levels in 70 years. Those who stayed faced a daunting prospect.
Scary, the water's lapping the veranda. We've lost our sheds down the back and a little pod that we had somebody renting, and we can't get out. We're on the priority list with SES, but SES can't get in either. We've got the ladder ready to go in a loft in one of the retreats out the back. We're in our guest house at the moment.
In Wollombi, floodwaters reached the roof of the local tavern. Owner Chris Brooks says he's been powerless to prevent the inundation.
People upstream give you indications of what's coming, so you can be somewhat prepared, but you just can't stop it. All our plant and machinery is under it, so all the air conditioning, the cool room, refrigeration, so all of that's underneath.
Jean Crawford Lane, whose isolated property is near a catchment of the Wollombi Brook, says it's the worst flooding in years.
We don't know when we'll get out. We don't know when council will be able to fix it. Yeah, we'll have to walk through when the waters finally go down. We'll have to walk through and get people to pick us up on the other side to take us out to get shopping, supplies, all that sort of stuff.
Mayor Sue Moore described the fatigue many are feeling.
Those people out in those low-lying areas of Whittingham, Glenrenning and Combo, they must be so sick of doing this and evacuation, being prepared. And the areas of Bulga and Broke, obviously waking up this morning to find devastating views and property losses. Hopefully they all stay safe.
Ahead of a visit to Sydney's disaster zones, New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet acknowledged the terrible toll.
There's been flood event after flood event. Many people are tired. There's a lot of anguish and despair. But our commitment from a state level and being here with the Commonwealth Government today is that we'll be with you every step of the way.
By his side, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese praised responders and promised more resources. From tomorrow, a third ADF helicopter and 250 defence personnel will join the response. Other states are also chipping in. 31 Victorian emergency service workers have been sent north to help.
Who at the worst of times, we always see the best of Australians. And once again, we're seeing that right now.
There's also more financial support, $1,000 payments for adults in the disaster zones. Children will also receive $400.
We know that this is having a real impact on people, and we want to make sure that the support's available as soon as possible.
Australian Prime Minister Albanese there. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A state of emergency and curfew is in place in the Ohio city of Akron as protests erupt over the latest killing of an unarmed black man by police. Akron police have released nearly 20 minutes of body cam videos of the fatal police shooting of Jayland Walker. The 25-year-old was shot 60 times within 7 seconds after police opened fire when he tried to flee a traffic stop. The police body cam videos are creating more questions about what did or did not happen. CNN's Paolo Sandoval is in Akron.
Authorities in the city of Akron released about 18 minutes of body camera videos, each minute offering a different perspective, showing 8 responding officers before they opened fire, shooting and killing 25-year-old Jayland Walker. After the release of the footage, Akron's police chief said those officers will have to account for each one of the shots that they fired.
They need to be able to articulate what specific threats they were facing, and that goes for every round that goes down the barrel of their gun. And they need to be held to account.
Akron's police chief says officers were attempting to pull Walker over for a traffic violation when they claim a single gunshot was allegedly fired from inside Walker's car while police were chasing his vehicle. They say this muzzle flash image captured by state traffic cameras is evidence, and investigators later recovered a shell casing at that scene. It was shortly after the car chase turned into a foot chase that those 8 officers opened fire with a barrage of bullets. Officers described Walker, wearing a ski mask, as reaching for his waistband right before they shot him, according to the police chief. A gun was found in his car, but Walker was unarmed at the time of the shooting. The Akron Police Union released a statement saying the decision to deploy lethal force, as well as the number of shots fired, is consistent with use of force protocols and the officers' training. The medical examiner's preliminary report, viewed by CNN, shows Walker's body covered with bullet wounds. Akron's police chief estimates there could have been more than 60. After the release of body camera footage nearly a week after the shooting, tensions flared, sparking protests. Demonstrators peacefully marched to the Akron mayor's doorstep on Monday. They were echoing the Walker family's call for accountability.
What I did see is, him get out the car and start running and people firing on him. And does it take that much?
Pastor Robert DeJournette, a cousin of the Walker family, says they want to get justice for Jalen in a peaceful and a dignified way.
We don't want any rioting or anything like that. We want answers. We are angry. We have the human side of us. We feel that the pain. And personally, I want to scream out and be mad, but what is that going to do? We want to take that anger. We want to use it for the benefit of systemic change.
In what's been labelled the biggest ever operation to tackle people smuggling across the English Channel, police officers from across Europe arrested more than 100 people accused of human trafficking. Last year, an estimated 28,000 people were smuggled in boats across the Channel from France to Britain. Over the years, hundreds have died while attempting to navigate busy shipping lanes and dinghies and other fragile vessels. The arrests are part of a Europe-wide operation to target one of the most significant organised crime groups, as the BBC's Anna Holligan explains.
22,000 police officers from right across Europe were involved, 130 suspects detained. They are suspected of trafficking up to 10,000 people across the English Channel over the last 18 months. This was a huge operation. The arrests were made, the raids were conducted in mostly Germany, but also France, Belgium, here in the Netherlands, and the UK. Osnabrück, German city, close to the Dutch border, about 100 kilometres away. That's understood to have been the hub. And in Germany, 900 officers were involved in the raids, arresting 18 people. The suspects are accused of bringing small, flimsy dinghies from China to Germany and then transporting them onto France, where they were used to make these illegal crossings. And German officials have described the traffickers' business model of illegally profiting from the suffering of people in need as vile and unscrupulous, and said it could only be tackled through international cooperation.
Researchers in Finland have installed the world's first fully working sand battery, which can store green power for months at a time. The device contains 100 tonnes of low-grade sand and is charged with heat made from cheap electricity from solar or wind. The sand stores the heat at around 500 degrees Celsius, which can then warm homes in winter. The developers say it could solve the problem of year-round supply, a major issue for green energy. The BBC's Matt McGrath has been to see the battery in action.
In the city of Tampere in western Finland, a pump pushes hot air into a large container of builder's sand. These rough and ready grains are surprisingly effective at retaining heat, storing it at very high temperatures for months at a time. The sand-based technology aims to overcome one of the biggest challenges facing renewable energy. What do you do when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine? Tommy Ardern is one of the developers behind the new system.
So we are heating the sand battery with clean electricity and then storing the heat there for usage later on.
So the whole point is to really time shift, basically. Capture the energy in the summer and then
transfer that to time that it's more useful.
The electricity from renewable sources is converted efficiently into heat. The sand retains the energy and can then release it to warm water for the district heating system when demand and energy prices are high. This could be very useful in the coming months. Russia has already cut off supplies of gas and electricity in response to Finland's decision to join NATO, and there is growing pressure to find new ways of storing heat for the long, cold Finnish winter. According to Elina Seppänen, an energy specialist with the City of Tampere Council, the sand battery idea could play a role in keeping energy costs down.
If we have some stations that are just there for a few weeks, few hours in the wintertime when it's the coldest, it's going to be extremely expensive. If we have this sort of solutions that provide flexibility for the use and for the storage of heat, that would help a lot in the expenses, I think.
The device has some important limitations at present. It's not yet possible to get electricity out of the battery in a cost-effective way. But with Finland soon to face into the colder months, heat is more important than light. And according to Pekka Passi, the managing director of the Vatajankoski power plant, who has invested in the technology, the sands of time are running out for fossil fuels. And it's now time for sand.
It's a bit strange, but it's cheap, it's easy to get, and you can get to really high temperatures, maybe 500 degrees, while with water you can only get to 100. So you get a lot of heat stored in a small space.
How does it look going forward in the future? Because the energy transition isn't going away. We're going to need more storage. Do you think we're going to be seeing more of these sand batteries around the place?
Yes, I think that all burning or heat production by burning will phase out maybe in 10-20 years' time. So we need these kinds of solutions where you use electricity. We like the idea that we want to try something new, be the first in the world to do something like this, like crazy, if you wish. And yeah, I think it's going to be a success.
And let's get to some of your feedback now on NCEA, with schools suffering from, well, a double whammy of COVID and winter ills. A teacher's got in touch to say, I'm a visual arts teacher in the Bay of Plenty, and I'm finding that all students are so behind due to illnesses in their families and their own illness. I have no idea how we are going to get their assessments done. NZQA may need to revisit the due dates for their external portfolios way too early. Students are really battling. I also feel it is the lower demographics with larger families that will be mostly disadvantaged. This needs to be considered. On groceries, the cost of and school meals, Shane from Hastings has got in touch to say free breakfast and lunch for all kids at school. No questions, no limitations, no kid misses out. This is a must. How can we not see the benefits for all of society? Someone else on the subject of what to put in lunchboxes, carrots. Cheapest chips, they say, healthy and kids love them. Uncle Michael's got in touch with a recipe. Get a muffin tray, fill it with any vegetable and one whole egg per muffin, and then put them in the oven for 12 minutes. It's great for the lunchbox, and he reckons they're called egg pies at his place. Another suggestion is check out Love Food Hate Waste, a website for recipe ideas. Tinned tomatoes and pasta go a long way. Mexican beans and lentils for soups can be stretched to feed people with toast as a side. And happy to help with recipes. This person says from our Rescue Food Cafe on Waiheke Island, Kai Cafe. And also a lot of feedback on the Supermarket Commissioner. This person says they should be named the Supermarket Witch Smeller Pursuivant. Cheers for that. That is about all we've got time for. Now, the Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything on our program, check us out on Spotify or Apple. And ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up's going to be speaking to a Mississippi reproductive rights activist who's vowing to keep helping people get abortions despite a ban coming into force. Now, I hope to be back tomorrow, although my future is uncertain. After a terrible accident with a very rare checkpoint mug, I've managed to smash it against the microphone. It's shattered. I'll consider my actions overnight.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Consumer Affairs Minister says the new Grocery Commissioner will be able to fine supermarkets for anti-competitive behaviour. The Prime Minister says higher numbers of COVID infections among older New Zealanders and an outbreak at North Shore Hospital have driven up hospitalisation rates. Police are investigating a burglary at a Tauranga mosque that's worried the Muslim community in the lead up to one of the biggest religious days of the year. And a former ACC employee who won a compensation case for being bullied on the job is appalled the manager responsible appears to have